a monstrous body racked with agony, a stench so overwhelming that courtiers fainted and servants gagged. And after his final breath, putrid fluids seeped from his coffin, lapped up by stray dogs on the cold stone floor. This is the unsettling, rarely told story of how Henry VIII of England, once Europe's most magnificent prince, met his end, broken, bloated, and unloved. The final chapter of his life is more than a medical curiosity. It's a chilling meditation on the corrupting nature of power and the inevitability of human frailty. Henry Tudor was born on June 28, 1491, into a kingdom that had only recently emerged from civil war. As a child, he was bright, charming, and precociously talented. His tutors noted his quick mind, his graceful athleticism, his love of music, hunting, and jousting. When his elder brother Arthur died, Henry became heir apparent. At 17, he inherited the throne and the hopes of a nation. To the world, he seemed to embody the ideal of the Renaissance monarch, tall, muscular, with reddish gold hair and dazzling blue eyes. Foreign ambassadors gushed over his looks and his presence. A Venetian envoy wrote, "He is a man of such appearance that he seems born to command all who behold him. In beauty and stature, he surpasses all other princes of Christendom." The people of England adored their young king. He seemed destined for greatness, but destiny is a fragile thing. By the time he reached his 40s, Henry had already earned notoriety for his controversial decisions, divorcing his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, defying the Pope, and establishing himself as the head of the Church of England. But in January 1536, everything began to unravel. During a jousting tournament at Greenwich Palace, Henry was thrown violently from his horse. The 44-year-old king was left unconscious for 2 hours, his immense weight crushing his own leg beneath him. Although he recovered enough to walk again, the injury never healed. It left him with an ulcer on his leg, a deep, festering wound that refused to close, constantly oozing and emitting an odour so revolting that even his most loyal attendants struggled to remain in the same room. The once vain king was devastated. His pride forced him to endure the pain without complaint, but everyone around him could smell his shame. Some historians believe this was more than just a physical injury. Trauma to his head may have damaged his brain, fueling the paranoia, cruelty, and fits of rage that would come to define his later years. The injury left him largely immobile. He could no longer joust, hunt, or dance as he had loved to do. Instead, he grew increasingly sedentary. His once impressive physique began to collapse under the weight of his lifestyle. His waistline ballooned from a trim 89 centimeters in his youth to over 130 centimeters in his final years. His weight soared beyond 180 kilograms. Special mechanical hoists were required just to lift him into bed or onto his horse. Palace doorways had to be widened to accommodate his bulk. Kitchen records show he devoured over 5,000 calories a day, gorging himself on roasted meats, heavy pies, gallons of beer, and endless wine. Vegetables were considered food for peasants and rarely touched his plate. This gluttony only worsened his condition. And yet no one dared question the king's habits. By the 1540s, Henry's ulcers had worsened to the point that his shin bones were exposed through the rotting flesh of his legs. Attendants would dress the wounds daily, often fainting from the stench. Accounts describe the odour as so powerful that his arrival in a corridor could be detected 3 rooms away. Yet in public, everyone was expected to bow, smile, and pretend nothing was wrong. A single look of disgust could lead to execution. The courtiers learned to mask their horror behind perfumed handkerchiefs and false cheer. One servant wrote, "The smell is beyond imagining, and yet we stand in his presence as if he were still the golden prince of old." At 49, Henry married Catherine Howard, a girl of just 19. He called it a return to youth, but it quickly became a farce. Catherine was repulsed by the monstrous man she was forced to share a bed with. She began an affair with a young courtier, and when Henry discovered the betrayal, he ordered both of them executed. His sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, was more of a nurse than a bride, tending to his sores, managing his moods, and trying to soothe his paranoia. She would outlive him, but not without scars of her own. By 1546, Henry was barely able to walk. Gangrene spread through his legs, and the ulcers became so infected that some claimed his flesh was already decomposing before his death. His breath grew laboured, and he slipped into bouts of delirium, calling out for his dead wives, particularly Jane Seymour, who had given him his only male heir. Yet no one dared speak of his impending death. English law forbade predicting the monarch's demise, so the fiction of his recovery was maintained until the very end. Those last weeks in court were a nightmare. The once proud halls of Whitehall Palace became a morgue of whispered rumours, covered noses, and terrified servants. All feared his wrath. Even in his final hours, the king could still order an execution. On the night of January 27th, 1547, Henry realised the end was near. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was summoned. When asked if he died in the Christian faith, Henry squeezed the archbishop's hand. His final conscious act. A few hours later, he was gone. But even in death, his body betrayed him. His size and condition made preparing his body for burial a nightmare. The embalming process was primitive, removing organs and packing the cavities with herbs. But the corpse continued to swell and leak. As it lay in state at the chapel in Sion Abbey, the coffin cracked, and dark, foul-smelling fluid dripped onto the floor. Stray dogs lapped at the liquid as horrified witnesses looked on. For a man who claimed divine authority, it was a shockingly undignified end. He was buried weeks later at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, next to Jane Seymour. The ceremony was grand and solemn, but everyone present knew the truth behind the pomp. Henry VIII spent his life fighting the Pope, rewriting laws, executing wives, and reshaping England to satisfy his desires. But he could not escape the limits of his own mortal body. The man who seemed larger than life died as nothing more than flesh and bone and decay. He who believed himself above the law, above the church, and above his people, could not place himself above death. His son Edward died young. His daughter Mary tried to undo his reforms, and it was his daughter, Elizabeth, the child of Anne Boleyn, whom he had executed, who would usher in England's golden age. A bitter irony for the man who had sought so desperately for a male heir. The death of Henry VIII is more than just history. It's a warning. Absolute power does not make you immortal. No crown can save you from the inevitability of decay, and no amount of fear, gold, or glory can preserve the body when it begins to fail. The man who transformed a nation was, in the end, nothing more than another human being, equal in death to even his humblest subject. For all his power, his end came not with glory, but with a stench so vile it cleared rooms and a coffin that could not contain him. Henry VIII remains one of history's most fascinating figures, not because of how he lived, but because of how he died.